Chapter 1081, The Returnee. With Patrick Bryan's chanting, the bones around the black casket were gradually stained with a dark green layer. They blended with the white, bringing out an extremely scary sensation. As the spirit dance became more and more intense, as though the voices from the underworld were constantly reverberating, the bones floated up one by one, as though they possessed lives of their own. Then, they were cast towards the heavy and pitch-black casket in what could be described as orderly chaos. They passed through the lid and entered as though they were incorporeal. The casket immediately transformed into a deep whirlpool that seemed like it couldn't be filled. It expanded on the spot, emitting a cold aura that was high and mighty. This made Patrick Bryan instinctively tremble and lower his head. This was an angel, the aura of a death console. At that moment, the believers of death, the ones who were dancing spirit dance, all collapsed to the ground with their bodies left convulsing. Their consciousness became muddled, as though they were touring the underworld. And above the gray fog, with the help of his marionettes, prayer points of light, the fool Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief, because the leader of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction, the angel who was sleeping in the mausoleum, the high priest hater's test, didn't exceed his expectations. Using the enslavement and control higher sequence beyonders of the death pathway had on lower sequence beyonders, he could directly obtain information from Patrick Bryan. From a certain point of view, this was an interrogation at the psyche level, something that Klein was rather proficient at dealing with. He immediately let the red priest card fly into his hand and enter his body. All of a sudden, Klein had a dark red robe draped over him. This appearance seemed to look like rust and settled gunpowder. As for his face, it was covered by a dark gold mask. The patterns on it were ancient, and set off a contrasting appearance with the crown he wore that was embedded with gems that sparkled red, blue, and green. Following that, he mobilized all the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog that he could, turning them into invisible torrents that surrounded the paper figurines he had prepared in advance. Through the prayer lights, it shot towards undying Patrick Bryan. At this moment, Patrick's body trembled slightly due to the feeling of submission he felt towards his teacher's aura, as though he could see layers of holy wings. Klein had hidden the exact appearance of the flaming angel, allowing a portion of it to be revealed. This also meant that he had interfered with the special effects. One holy wing after another enveloped Patrick before vanishing, causing him to hallucinate in confusion. As a Sequence 4 demigod, he quickly came to his senses. He realized that he no longer yearned to submit and not be able to disobey his teacher's orders. His consciousness seemed to have been pulled out of his body as he stared calmly at everything above the mind world. At the same time, as a zealot, Patrick Bryan didn't hesitate to view Angel's embrace as a gift from death. There was no doubt about it. At that moment, in the deep vortex formed from the black casket, an old and cold voice sounded out, one that could rip out a person's soul from their bodies.
Not bad. Any progress in awakening God recently?
Patrick Bryan followed the instructions given by the Blessed, and he described his efforts and intentions in a half-truthful manner. After a series of questions and answers, the Death Domain angel on the other side of the vortex, Hater, didn't suspect anything. He calmly said,
Very good. Continue doing it. I will support you.
He paused for a moment and nonchalantly said,
I will send you an assistant first, a Sequence 5 gatekeeper, to help you in completing the corresponding tasks to relieve your stress.
Is this what His Excellency mentioned about not being at ease with me? Teacher is indeed unwilling to see me gain the favor of God and threaten his position.
Having been slowly influenced by Klein through his daily communications with him, Patrick Bryan, who had slowly changed his mindset, had no way of rejecting such kind intentions. He could only answer politely,
Yes, teacher.
Just as he said that, the pitch-black vortex suddenly opened up. It transformed into a mysterious pattern, conjuring up a pair of indescribable, double bronze doors. With a creaking sound, the door opened and a crack widened. There was still darkness behind the rift, and there seemed to be eyes hidden in the depths of the darkness, quietly watching the outside. At that moment, a palm stretched out and rested on the door crack. Its skin was rather pale, allowing one to see the blue blood veins underneath. With a tug, a figure leaped out of the door. This was a young, tall man wearing a black robe with red linings with his hood pulled up. His facial features were gentle, and his skin was slightly brown. It was obvious at a glance that he was from a southern continent bloodline. He was rather handsome, but he looked anemic. Stepping on the solid ground beneath his feet, the young man didn't even glance at Patrick Bryan. He raised his head and looked into the sky. The corners of his mouth curled up as he narrowed his eyes and sighed.
This intoxicating atmosphere.
As a beyonder of the death pathway, to be ignored by someone whose sequence was lower than his, there was no doubt that Patrick Bryan was a little angry. But in front of his teacher, he had no choice but to follow the flow and end the ritual. During this process, the fool's response above the gray fog was even more intense than Patrick's. Because through the gray fog's true vision, he could see the abnormality of the new gatekeeper. The gatekeeper's internal underworld expanded in an odd manner, covering every part of his body. And there was only one soul in the underworld, a young and handsome soul with red hair, signs of rotting on its face, and a flag mark on its glabella. It wore black, blood-stained armor. Klein wasn't unfamiliar with his soul, for he immediately recognized it.
The Red Angel Evil Spirit, Sauron Einhorn Medici. This fellow has returned to Backlund again, and had a certain working relationship with the Angel of the Numinous Episcopate's Artificial Death faction.
Klein instinctively took out the Red Priest card and accommodated the Tyrant card before summoning the Sea God Scepter. He planned on giving the Red Angel Evil Spirit a zap of Lightning Storm, but as his thoughts raced, he restrained this impulse and gave up on the corresponding thoughts.
This would expose Patrick Bryan's problem and let the angel from the death domain guess that something had happened to artificial death. This wasn't beneficial to the Evernight goddess's control and digestion of the death pathway's uniqueness.
Amidst his thoughts, he quickly left the world above the gray fog and returned to the real world. He made his marionette secretly leave the clothing factory and teleport away with his body. He had originally planned on creating a shocking experience for Patrick Bryan after the ritual. He had even made some preparations beforehand. Now he could only give up to prevent the Red Angel Evil Spirit from discovering him. Inside the clothing factory, the young gatekeeper, who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici, pulled his hood even lower before turning his head slightly and looking in a particular direction outside. That was the spot where Klein's marionette, Kuonas Kilgore, had been hiding, nearly 1 kilometer away from the factory. After staring at it for a few seconds, the young gatekeeper revealed an obvious smile. Just as Patrick Bryan was about to say something, planning to use his identity of the person in charge of the Numinous Episcopate's Artificial Death faction to haze the envoy of his teacher, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around in a bizarre manner, casting his gaze on another building in the factory. On the second floor of the building, behind a glass window in a room, there was a pair of emotionless black eyes staring at them. Patrick Bryan's eyelids twitched and his body suddenly vanished. Woo! A cold wind blew, causing the glass window to rot silently. Without any movement, it crumbled into countless snowflakes. In the corresponding room, a skinny Patrick in a black robe and a thin face emerged. He saw that the master of that pair of cold, black eyes was a rough mud doll.
Who made the doll? Who moved it here?
Patrick Bryan looked around cautiously, not missing any corners. Just as he turned his gaze towards the corridor and faced the glass window with his body slanted, the crude, black eyes of the mud doll suddenly turned. Then, it raised its hands and grabbed Patrick's neck. Halfway through the action, the mud doll seemed to lose its support and lost all mobility. Many cracks appeared on its surface as it instantly shattered into pieces. Patrick Bryan's figure disappeared first before he appeared in the corridor, staring at the collapsed doll as if he was facing a most powerful enemy. At that moment, he had really jumped in fright. Although there were all sorts of bizarre and harrowing matters related to spirits, it was still quite scary for a puppet to suddenly come alive without the influence of an external spirit body. The mud doll lay there quietly in fragments without so much as a stir. Patrick Bryan waited patiently for a while before finally confirming that there were no more abnormalities. He shuttled through the spirit world once again and returned to the place where the ritual had been held. At that moment, the heavy, pitch-black casket had completely decayed. It was as if it had been buried in the ground for centuries, if not millennia, and the surrounding underworld believers were slowly recovering from their semi-conscious state. Patrick Bryan looked around but could not find the young gatekeeper sent by his teacher. He didn't know when he had left.
Isn't he here to spy on me?
The demigod of the death pathway was at a loss. Taking into consideration the abnormal discovery he had made, the living mud doll, Patrick Bryan didn't delay any further. He quickly snapped his followers awake and cleaned up the scene and removed all traces. After he was done, he suddenly heard a voice.
Is this clothing factory yours?
Patrick Bryan's figure instantly disappeared and appeared again, now facing the person who spoke. That was the young gatekeeper who had gone somewhere.
No.
Patrick frowned slightly.
How could he do such a thing in his own factory? If he was exposed, wouldn't there be no way out?
Not too stupid.
The young gatekeeper nodded gently. Patrick narrowed his eyes and suppressed his anger.
Where did you go?
The young gatekeeper chuckled and said,
I visited some familiar spots and met a friend.
Chapter 1082, Sudden Turn of Events. After teleporting back, Klein didn't delay at all. He immediately set up an altar and held a ritual to pray to death.
You are the essence of death. You are the Lord of the dead. You are the final home to all living beings. I pray for your help. I pray that you will know how to resolve the problem of the Red Angel evil spirit. He has possessed the body of a gatekeeper and is cooperating with the numinous episcopate's high priest, Hater. He has come to Backlund and been made an assistant to Patrick Bryan.
With regard to this matter, there was really no choice but to seek help from the Evernight goddess. Ignoring the possibility of seeking out the ascetic leader Ariana in a cooperation effort, or whether he had the ability to finish off Sauron Einhorn Medici, even if he could, once the Red Angel evil spirit disappeared, the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's high priest would immediately understand that something major had happened here. He could then connect it to other abnormalities and determine that there was something wrong with artificial death's condition. Then, using his own level and status, possible sealed artifacts, and his familiarity with the pathway, he might be able to create mutually harmful acts of destruction. And if he ignored the Red Angel, this evil spirit who was a conspirer wouldn't take long to detect something abnormal with Patrick Bryan. With his knowledge and intelligence, it wasn't difficult to guess the nature of the problem.
No matter how I deal with it, it'll be a problem. As expected of an angel in the war domain, even if he is a 3-in-1 spirit body, he can still create unresolvable problems for others. This must have actually been an idea that he gave Hater. Actually, I do have an extreme idea. That is to let the Red Angel evil spirit be killed by other churches, official organizations, or secret organizations for another whole different matter. In short, anything related to the goddess cannot come center stage. Things must be made very clear. The difficulty with this approach is how to let an extremely experienced, high-ranking member of the conspiring domain fall into a trap. If I don't handle it well, it might backfire on me.
After the prayer ended, Klein casually let his thoughts wander as he waited patiently for the Evernight goddess to give him a response. After more than 10 seconds, the herbal dregs that pleased the deity were swept up by an invisible wind. They flew out and landed on the table, forming words. His coming spells the raising of arms. Looking at the sentence that gave him a sense of déjà vu, he frowned slightly. As a seer, he habitually interpreted it.
What does that mean? Due to the king's problem, Lowen has fallen into the shadows of war. Hence, the Red Angel that symbolizes war came. This means that it might no longer be possible to stop the war. Upon reaching sequence 1, one would become a symbol of certain phenomena.
As these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, the invisible wind came to a stop. The altar, which was completely isolated by the wall of spirituality, turned extremely silent. After waiting for a while, Klein confirmed,
There are no other revelations.
So he ended the ritual and cleared the altar. This to men? Why? He then walked to the sofa in the room and sat down to see if anything else would happen. After a full 15 minutes, he didn't usher in the arrival of the matron of the Evernight cloister, the leader of the 13 archbishops, Angel of Concealment, Ariana.
I don't have to deal with the Red Angel evil spirit, and I should just leave him be. Or, there's another solution, but my involvement isn't needed.
In essence, he wasn't a devout believer of Evernight. Since the goddess said that he didn't need to bother about it, he naturally couldn't be bothered to do so. After all, this matter was not only extremely troublesome for him, but it was also extremely dangerous. Shaking his head, Klein took out a pen and paper from his pocket and began a dream divination. What had happened tonight made him feel that he couldn't waste any time. He had to digest the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion as soon as possible. Above the fog sea, inside a steam-powered merchant ship that was extremely close to a pirate ship, one by one, the men and older women were tied up and pushed to the edge of the deck. Then, the pirates either used their hands or legs to throw them into the sea. The splashing sounds didn't affect the pirates at all, guffawing over this bloodless massacre. After clearing the captives, they carried their guns and lanterns to the shipboard, preparing to enjoy the pitiful bugs struggling. However, under the light, the dark blue sea beside the boat quietly undulated. No one was there. Nyan, a pirate, blurted out in surprise.
They sank so quickly.
The leader of this pirate crew frowned. After looking at it for a while, he said,
Perhaps some sea monsters passed by and treated those who dared resist us as food bestowed by the gods. Perfect timing. If we feed it, it won't attack us.
Upon saying this, the leader waved his hand.
Everyone, enjoy yourselves.
As a fairly experienced pirate, he knew that there were many strange things at sea. It was best not to seek out the reason and try to figure out the truth. Since it didn't harm him or his crew, he would thank the Lord of Storms for his blessings, doing so as though nothing had happened. After making sure that there were people on duty, the pirates began gulping down copious amounts of alcohol, ate huge chunks of meat, sang loudly, and fought for the rights to the young female captives. In the noisy and lively atmosphere, the pirate leader led a beautiful passenger that he had long taken a liking to into the captain's room. He eagerly began the final process for that night of revelry. In the middle of the night, the tired pirate leader stretched out his right hand and touched something cold. He jolted awake. Through the crimson moonlight shining through the window, he saw a piece of coarse wood in his arms. A series of branches with green leaves grew out from the wooden block, hugging him like a human's limbs. Pah! The pirate leader's pupils rapidly dilated as he pushed away the wood, jumped off the bed, and stumbled back.
Was I with such a thing previously?
His mind was filled with terror. He couldn't care less about his clothes, picking up a flintlock and cutlass before leaving the room immediately. Outside, there was a pirate on duty, Kaya. When the pirate saw his leader open the door, he quickly asked,
How can I be happy to steal your ear?
The pirate leader had originally wanted to chide the other party for secretly drinking, resulting in his incoherence. However, when he looked up, he saw that his subordinate's mouth and his surroundings were filled with golden grains. Even the surface of his tongue was covered in dense clusters. The pirate leader's scalp tightened as he felt a numbing chill run down his spine. At this moment, the door across the corridor opened as well. A pirate shouted with a sobbing tone,
Oh no, boss, I have a lot of mushrooms growing there.
As he spoke, the pirate ran out. At the same time, he felt his eyes itch. He raised his hand and rubbed his right eye. As he rubbed his eyes, a green vine slowly grew out from the gaps between his eye socket and his eyeball. There was a dark red grape at the end of it. The flesh around the grape was a blur. Eye-bai was ba-ku-wa-hai. The pirate leader's body froze when he saw this. He asked in a voice that didn't belong to him,
What did you guys encounter?
While rubbing his eye, the pirates, who didn't notice the problem, said without any recollection,
A pole-like shadow struck me.
The pirate, whose tongue was covered in golden wheat, echoed.
You.
He was blocked by his leader and didn't see his fellow crew members' terrifying appearance. The pirate leader's legs began to shake uncontrollably. He instinctively turned around and ran out of the cabin. At this moment, he saw a long wall that looked like a shadow from a pole rapidly sweep towards him before lashing out at him. The shadow flashed and soon disappeared. It was as though it was a surreal nightmare. The pirate leader was just a beat slower before he subconsciously raised his hand to block. This was obviously not effective. Then he looked at himself in panic and didn't find anything unusual. Ach! The pirate leader couldn't help but let out a sigh.
Thankfully.
Before he could finish, he suddenly heard a slightly muffled voice. Thankfully. This voice seemed to come from his body. The pirate leader's pupils dilated to the extreme as he involuntarily lifted up his clothes. He then saw 3 cracks appear between his chest. 1 big, 2 small. 2 rows of white teeth were neatly arranged in the large crack, and in the middle of the small crack were 2 lively and nimble eyeballs embedded in them. It was a mouth and 2 eyes. The pirate leader had a mouth and 2 eyes on his chest.
No!
A scream rang out from the boat, filled with indescribable terror. In the next 15 minutes, some of the pirates went mad and killed their companions. Some successfully escaped back to their own ship, only to discover that the people on it had also turned mutated. Hence, they jumped into the sea in despair. By the time everything calmed down, there were only about 10 normal pirates slumped on the deck and hiding in their rooms. There was a stench around them. After a while, passengers came out of the cabin one after another. They looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. They either thanked the gods or stood there in a daze. It was early in the morning. Klein got out of bed and began to wash up. Just as he was changing his clothes with the help of his valet, Returnee, he saw butler Walter, who had just returned from a leave of absence, walk to the door and say,
Sir, Bishop Electra is here to pay a visit.
Let him wait for me in the activity room where he can enjoy a cigar.
Klein hesitated for a moment before saying, Ende, Kumes. He suspected that this was a late response from the goddess. Walter immediately turned around and went downstairs to make the arrangements. Before long, he returned and said,
Sir, Bishop Electra has already bade farewell and left. He wanted me to tell you that you must go to St. Samuel Cathedral in the morning. He said that the church and the government are going to hold an air raid drill together.
Air raid drill?
Klein frowned. At that moment, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around and looked out the window. In the air, there were rows of dark brown-colored airships approaching. These airships had slanted patterns of red, white, and yellow emblems. This was the flag of Fasak. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly understood what he had overlooked.
War might not be initiated by the Loan Kingdom. An ancient and hidden organization definitely had very high-ranking members in other countries. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to affect the world's situation.
Chapter 1083, Backlund in Chaos. Although the Sonia Sea wasn't like the Fog Sea, with it often being filled with fog, the northern regions would occasionally fill up with a rather thick fog every autumn and winter morning. Alger Wilson's Blue Avenger was sailing in such an environment, following the borders of the Sonia Island back to the Loen coast. He had already spent too long in the North Sonia Sea, so he needed to return for a routine report. Within the pale white fog, the ghost ship quietly proceeded forward, occasionally appearing like a dream that didn't leave any traces. Alger was wrapped by the wind as he stood in midair in front of the window, admiring the white world outside. He allowed his thoughts to wander in different directions. Suddenly his eyes focused as some silvery white light flashed in his pupils. He saw a large sail through the fog in the distance, and a massive ship silently cruised past. This ship wasn't alone. Behind it were several similar ships. 1, 2, 3. They formed a fleet that spanned a great distance.
Faysak's Sonia Sea Fleet. They've all been mobilized. Where are they heading to?
Alger's feet landed on the deck. His gaze immediately turned to the other side, where Sonia Island was located. After the various exchanges at the Tarot Club, Alger was already certain that the world situation was tense, with war about to break out at any moment. At that moment, he made some connections and made a guess. To the Faysak Empire and the Loan Kingdom, Sonia Island was extremely important. If it were occupied by the Loan Kingdom, Faysak's Eastern Naval Fleet would be completely blocked off in the cold north, unable to vie for any of the various colonies in the Sonia Sea or head to East Balaam. Meanwhile, after waging war, if they wanted to threaten the Loan Kingdom's hinterlands, they would have to cross the Amantha mountain range or across the mid-seashore, passing through the defenses of several counties. That would be extremely difficult. And if Sonia Island was conquered by the Faysak Empire, then they could use that as a base to attack all the ports in the north and central regions of Loan, including but not limited to Enmat Harbor or Pritz Harbor. If the Faysak commander was more daring and unfazed by the losses, he could even be able to directly target the capital of the Loan Kingdom, Backlund, which was not far from the port. It was precisely because of this that the two countries had waged the 20-year war. The Faysak Empire clinched victory, and they had obtained the crucial southern path. In the Battle of the Violated Oath, Loan had won the war, but had failed to regain this territory. Its strategic goals for the war were only half achieved. Alger stared at this scene for a moment before speaking in a serious tone.
Is war about to erupt?
In Backlund, a large number of airships from Faysak had entered from North Borough and arrived above the huge city. As soon as they drew near, the Holy Wind Cathedral seemed to have made certain precautions. The howling of the wind intensified, turning into several giant bluish-black blades that whistled towards the target like surface-to-air missiles. Seeing that the huge blades were about to hit the airbags of the airship, an invisible layer of defense appeared and shielded it from all the attacks. Under the violent strike, the transparent wall shook, but ultimately managed to hold on. At the same time, the compartment for guns, projectile launchers, and cannons of the airship opened up and aimed downwards. Boom! As a hurricane around the Holy Wind Cathedral took form, a loud, explosive boom emanated in every direction. In such a terrifying storm, the airships were like boats sailing through the sea where they met mountain-like waves and were about to be tossed into the distance. At that moment, the blood and rust-like beams of light flashed on the leading airship. They enveloped all the other accompanying airships and connected them together. Suddenly, Faysak's airship fleet had stabilized in the hurricane and was no longer a puny boat in the gigantic waves. The power of the high-level Red Priest pathway belonged to war, and war was the art of gathering the masses. This was the authority of a war bishop. After the Five Eyes blocked this wave of attacks, they took advantage of the gap in between the wave of attacks to deliver their bombs through the hatches and allow them to drop beneath them. And in the hurricane, the trajectories of the bombs became unpredictable. Boom! Boom! The cannon hatches also lit up and showed off their prowess that would honor the god of war. This airship fleet didn't attempt to travel through Backlund. After entering Northborough, it immediately turned to Westborough, the center of politics for the Loan Kingdom. Northborough, Backlund University of Technology. The withered Intis parasol tree leaves swayed in the wind. Students were either carrying books or bags as they walked around the campus. As a member of an institute of higher education, as the first batch of students of this reorganized university, these young adults were full of vigor. They looked forward to their future and would gather together every day to discuss their ideals, recite poems, and research technology. They were pure and happy. Melissa Moretti walked amidst them as she raised her head to look at the wall clock at the top of the main teaching building and involuntarily hastened her pace. She had to go to Chancellor Moment's office today to prepare for the upcoming mechanical laboratory that was to be officially launched. This was something that she enjoyed greatly, something which made her feel happy every day. She felt that life on campus was so wonderful and that her classmates were so adorable. Subconsciously, Melissa looked at the steam locomotive in the middle of the square. Its massive, complicated body was displaying its infinite charm in the machinery industry. Quite a number of students liked to gather there, knocking, hitting, and analyzing its structure. As for the school, it didn't encourage or forbid it. The corners of Melissa's lips curled into a smile as she moved to look away. Suddenly, a metallic gray object descended from the sky and landed in the middle of the square. Boom! The ground shook violently as all the windows of the main teaching building shattered. If not for the distance, Melissa might have been thrown up by the blast of air. Countless screams rang out, and like the other students, Melissa fled in panic, not knowing what had happened. She was only 16 years old, after all. She had never experienced such a scene before. The billowing dust and smoke gradually fell. After hiding behind a tree, Melissa subconsciously looked at the spot where the explosion had just occurred. Her expression instantly froze, and her eyes glazed over. The steam locomotive's head was already in pieces. Its components and fragments were scattered everywhere. The students around it, and those passing by, had already collapsed to the ground, their bodies no longer intact. They were no longer breathing. Some of them were covered in blood, others charred. There were some moaning in pain. This scene was like an oil painting that wasn't realistic enough. Melissa stared at it in a daze, momentarily at a loss for a reaction. Carter, she knew that male student who had a great spirit for research. Every time everyone was in discussion, he would confidently say that he was going to be a ship engineer. Now he only had half his lower body left, and his intestines were all over the ground. Eudora, she was a student from the same faculty as her. Despite studying machinery, she loved poetry very much and was rather talented in this aspect. She was loved by the people around her. Sometimes Melissa would also attend their gatherings and quietly listen to Eudora's recital. She felt that this girl was really attractive, but now her leg was badly mutilated and she was moaning half-consciously in pain. In just a few seconds, these people's future had been cruelly changed. It was only when many teachers rushed out of the teaching block and started to rescue the injured and evacuate the students that Melissa woke up from her trance and hurriedly moved closer to the teachers. One of the teachers wore a look of terror, but he still held his breath and made arrangements with his clear voice, as though he had been specially trained.
Listen to me. All of you are to split up into two groups. One batch will head to the laboratories, and the other to Tiffany Cathedral. They all have an underground area that you can hide in.
He looked around and saw that the students didn't dare to leave the teachers. He hurriedly said,
Don't worry. The enemy's airship has already turned and gone to Westboro. There's no danger here.
His words were accompanied by a rumbling explosion that came from the southwest.
Westboro. The kingdom's parliament, various departments, and municipal halls are there.
Upon hearing the teacher's words, Melissa immediately thought of many things. As the light in her eyes flickered, she suddenly pursed her lips tightly and ran towards the school gate, ignoring her teacher calling from behind. As she moved along the sheltered area, Melissa quickly arrived on the streets. She panted heavily and looked around, trying to get her bearings. At that moment, she saw the subway entrance nearby. Although she was flustered, she still remembered what the teacher had just said.
Underground area that you can hide in?
Isn't the subway underground? The bombing has just started, and the subway probably hadn't stopped moving.
As her thoughts raced, Melissa rushed towards the entrance that showed signs of bombardment. Upon going underground, she realized that the people here weren't as many as she had expected. Most ordinary people who had never been trained wouldn't think of hiding in here immediately. The subway had indeed not stopped moving, but no one was checking the tickets. After a short wait, Melissa ran over, her lips tightly pursed and her face filled with anxiety. After 3 stops, the subway stopped at Kings Avenue. Melissa squeezed through the crowd and rushed out of the carriage. She had already recovered her stamina. She ran along the stairs, her speed increasing ever so slightly before she quickly reached the surface. At this moment, whatever she could see was in a state of chaos. Many buildings had collapsed as they were burning in scarlet flames. Broken limbs, blood, and the dead were everywhere. She could hear cries, screams, and orders. Upon seeing this scene, Melissa became even more anxious as she tried to run towards the 4-story building where the kingdom's Ministry of Finance was located. However, the area had already been sealed. She could see that many window panes had shattered. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, and there were still traces of an explosion. Melissa tried to enter the perimeter but was stopped by the soldiers who were maintaining order. This only served to increase her anxiety as her eyes reddened. At this moment, she saw a familiar figure. It was the black-haired, brown-eyed Benson, who wasn't wearing a hat. Upon seeing Melissa, Benson immediately rushed over. He looked anxious and angry as he shouted,
Why are you here? Why aren't you hiding underground? I'm very safe here. Quick, follow me there.
Didn't you not go underground either?
Melissa, who had never been shouted at by her brother, wanted to instinctively retort, but her vision was already blurry. Benson let out a breath and softened his tone.
It's good that you're okay. Quick, don't wander around on the streets.
Upon hearing his words, the panic and concern in Melissa's heart calmed down. At this moment, she felt that even if she were to die, it wouldn't be that scary anymore. At least she wouldn't be the only one left at home. At this moment, a bomb was blown over by a hurricane and was landing towards the area. But suddenly, the bomb changed directions abruptly and flew off horizontally. Boom! It exploded in midair, only stirring up a blast of air. Chapter 1084, The People in War. Boom! Boom! In the building at Sherwood Borough's 17 Minsk Street, the female owner of the building, Stellan Sammer, and her maidservants heard a loud explosion from afar. She fearfully hid in a corner of the room, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet was trembling. Only after the constant, terrifying commotion started to fade away did she straighten her body and look left and right with an unusually strained mind.
What exactly happened?
The two maidservants simultaneously shook their heads. They were both at a loss and also afraid. As soon as she left the corner of the room, she instinctively wanted to walk out of the room and talk to her neighbors to figure out what had just happened. However, she was worried that another attack would happen again, so she had no choice but to pace around in the living room. After a few minutes, she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. She quickly turned her head and realized that her husband, Luke Sammer, had returned with his valet.
Aren't you working?
Stellan asked subconsciously. The stout Luke replied solemnly,
I happened to pass by the vicinity and came back immediately. Quick, put on your coat. Let's go to the cathedral now.
What happened? What happened?
Stellan asked again. Luke took 2 steps forward and said,
Faceax airships are bombarding Backlund.
How could this be?
Stellan's eyes widened in disbelief.
Now is not the time to discuss this. Whatever it is, it has already happened. We have to go to the cathedral immediately.
Luke gave his wife a hug.
Don't worry too much. I think those airships aren't heading over.
All right, all right.
Stellan replied in a panic. As she wore the coat the maidservant had brought over, she instinctively said with concern,
What about the children?
Luke said calmly,
They're at the church's school, so there will be people who will arrange for them to take shelter. We don't have the time to reach them.
All right.
Stellan made a prayer gesture, hoping that the deity she believed in would provide them with protection. The two of them, along with their male and female servants, quickly exited their house and walked towards the other end of the street. As she passed by Unit 58, Stellan took a glance and whispered,
Previously, I had laughed at Lawyer Jurgen, saying that he gave up a lot of opportunities in Backlund from moving to the south just because of Mrs. Doris's ailments. Now, I'm starting to envy him.
Luke shot her a look and said,
Don't worry too much. It'll be fine.
While walking quickly, Stellan couldn't help but ask,
Luke, are we fleeing Backlund?
Luke Sammer answered firmly,
No, there's no need. This was just an accident.
Seeing that his wife was clearly confused, he added,
Backlund is the capital of the kingdom, so it has to be the most well-defended area. This time, it was just an oversight that no one expected. The next time, the Phasacians won't have another chance. The kingdom has the strongest military in the northern and southern continents. The Phasacians will definitely be taught a lesson. There's no way they can invade Backlund again. After this, Backlund will definitely be the safest place to be.
I see.
Stellan felt that her husband's words made sense, and she was willing to believe him. After the explanation, Luke fell silent for a few seconds.
However, we still have to make some preparations. Once the church announces that we can move freely, we'll immediately fetch the children back and buy more food. We'll buy as much as we can.
Inside a public school in the Backlund Bridge area. Due to the distance, Daisy and her classmates didn't realize what had happened in the north and west boroughs, nor did they sense the chaos that had spread from Hillston Borough to Cherwood Borough. However, teachers still came to their classrooms and arranged for them to line up to head to the nearest cathedral. This made Daisy recall the Great Smog of Backlund last year. Back then, they had also been asked to hide in the cathedral beside the school.
Did something similar happen again?
The trauma in Daisy's heart made her tremble slightly as she felt intense sadness and anger. When she passed by the door, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at the teacher in charge and ask,
Is it another disaster?
The teacher didn't know the details and had only followed the orders sent by a telegram.
Maybe.
Is there a disaster like this every year, or maybe even more than one?
Daisy asked, with a slightly ethereal voice with a tinge of innocence. The teacher looked at her with pity and shook his head.
All difficulties will pass. God will protect everyone.
Daisy didn't waste his time and followed the crowd to the nearest cathedral in a somewhat blank manner, Northborough, 22 Phelps Street. After hearing the explosion inside the Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation, the first thing Audrey did was to conceal her dragon scales before rushing to the window. Seeing the airships with the FASAC flag appearing in the air and the bombs being carried away by a hurricane and being thrown into the distance, either landing on the ground and exploding or disappearing as though they had entered the spirit world, a thought flashed across her mind, the words that the world Mr. Gehrman Sparrow had said, as well as the mission of the psychology alchemists. She came to a realization.
War had truly erupted.
She immediately turned her head and said to the huge golden retriever, Susie, her personal lady's maid, Annie, and the others,
Quick, hide in St. Samuel Cathedral.
Although Audrey didn't know how to deal with an air raid, the education she received from a young age told her to go to a cathedral as soon as possible if she ever encountered danger. In fact, she instinctively wanted to rush back to Empress Borough to protect her mother. However, considering that Annie, the other servants and staff were ordinary people who lacked experience and the ability to deal with such a crisis, she had no choice but to take care of them and accompany them to St. Samuel Cathedral. In order to resolve any dangers that she might encounter along the way, she planned to put on Hand of Horror and lie. On the one hand, she could distort the trajectory of bullets, while on the other hand, she could control flames and trigger the bombs in advance. In the face of long-range attacks, the beyonder powers of the spectator pathway were indeed not effective. While secretly protecting her servants and the Foundation's staff, she successfully entered St. Samuel Cathedral and saw a few bishops and priests approaching her. One of the bishops quickly brought her to the side to console her.
Miss Audrey, you don't have to worry about the Earl and his wife, as well as Lord Hibbert. They have people to protect them. An air raid like this won't harm them. Besides, you also know how grand your family basement is and how strong it is.
After taking off her fishnet gloves, she nodded and acknowledged the words of the bishop. She was no longer in a hurry to return home, and instead asked,
What's the current situation like?
After a simple exchange of words, the bishop led Audrey's group towards the underground area of the cathedral.
The Phasacians have lost 2 airships and have moved towards West Borough. Don't worry, all the defenses have been mustered. They won't cause any further damage.
And further below was where the Nighthawks were active, 160 Backlund Street. Butler Walter and a group of servants hid in an underground area which was used as a wine cellar. This was done under Dwayne Dantes' orders, and this gentleman had headed out to find Bishop Electra with his valet. After an unknown period of time, Walter and company heard a knock on the door. Through the peephole, they confirmed that their employer had returned. Klein said as he surveyed the area,
There aren't any more raids now, but it's best you hide at St. Samuel Cathedral for a while.
Walter replied on behalf of the servants before asking,
Yes, sir. And after that?
As a qualified butler, he often read the papers and understood that the situation was tense. It wasn't difficult to guess that a war would break out after the explosions. Klein thought for a moment before saying,
Once the church has verified the situation, we'll head to Magur Manor. You can bring your family along. No matter what, the capital of the kingdom is definitely a relatively safe place, and the manor at the periphery of the capital definitely wouldn't be a target of air raids, as it's of no value. Yes, there's enough food in Magur Manor, and there's a large supply of wine. Even if the war were to be extended for a long time, we won't have to worry about starving to death.
Upon hearing the employer's words, the servants, who had already formed a family, immediately revealed looks of delight, wiping away their pale looks of fear. Walter expressed his gratitude directly. Vegel, Shachadosh, Achachadosh, he said with some deliberation,
You can buy more food. Under such circumstances, no one will find it excessive. Also, there might not be any more attacks near Backlund, but I can't say the same for security. The manor outside the city must be on guard.
Klein nodded.
I've also considered this. I'll discuss this with Member of Parliament Macht and military personnel about purchasing a batch of decommissioned weapons and bullets. You must practice more. Anyway, during this period of time, Anuni and I will return to Backlund to handle certain matters according to the situation. If there's anything I haven't considered, I'll make up for it later.
As for the food, he didn't forbid Butler Walter from buying it. This way, if a famine really happened, he would have the ability to save them. After discussing the follow-up procedures, everyone in the residence of Duane Dantes packed up their luggage and brought their valuables. They followed their employer into St. Samuel Cathedral and arrived underground. With a single glance, he saw Audrey walking amidst the people, placating their moods. He smiled and nodded at her. Upon seeing Duane Dantes, Audrey smiled back and confirmed that nothing major had happened from his attitude. Force and CO had moved again, but they were still at the borders of Eastborough, and they were even closer to the Backlund Bridge area. After waking up naturally, Force rubbed her hair and walked out of the bedroom to prepare lunch. As she looked around, she saw Shio, who had gone out early, sitting on a chair and flipping through the newspapers.
What's wrong?
Forrest asked blankly. Shio frowned and said,
The Phasacians air raids bombed North and Westborough.
What?
Forrest first blurted out before recalling the matters that had been discussed at the Tarot Club. At that moment, a paperboy's voice came from outside.
Extra, extra, the kingdom declares war on Fasak. Extra, extra, the kingdom declares war on Fasak.
Chapter 1085, Scrutinizing the Situation.
Extra, extra, the kingdom declares war on Fasak.
On the way from Magur Manor to Backlund, Klein heard the paperboy shouting on the streets with brisk steps while on a horse carriage. Although he had already made preparations, he still sighed after confirming that the war had truly erupted. He couldn't help but feel depressed again. The grudge from having Sonia Island, a key territory, taken away. The conflict over the rights of the colonies. The defeat from the previous war. The political corruption leading to a recession. Ever since the repeal of the Grain Act, many farmers of the kingdom have gone bankrupt due to the importing of foreign food products. The lower class live in abject conditions. The rich-poor divide only grew deeper. The middle class's blind confidence in the Lowen Kingdom's might and the eager desire to raise their own positions. The intensifying conflict between different political factions in high society leading to a fracture. The king and his faction wish for a large-scale war. With all these factors combined, just from an objective standpoint, and considering this from the angle of materialism, it's almost inevitable for Lowen to start a war. Reality is the best author. Jumping out from his experience from the past, Klein scrutinized the Lowen Kingdom's situation from a fresh point of view. He realized that the tides of the times had already formed and were surging over. Without a true deity's descent, It was completely unstoppable. In comparison, what puzzled him more was why the Faceac Empire would be willing to initiate a war. Even if the members of an ancient secret organization were indeed members of the upper echelons of Faceac or the Church of the God of Combat, key figures who had the right to make the decision, there was no way they could be alone in deciding such an important matter.
How could the others agree to a world war? Could it be that the conflict between the various classes in the Faceac Empire has also completely escalated to the point that it urgently needs a war?
With his lack of understanding of the Empire of the North, it was difficult for Klein to make an accurate judgment.
But they just won the East Balaam War and reaped more of the rights to the colonies. There's no reason for its situation to be more serious than Lowen's. Yes, the royal family, the Einhorn family, is in control of the Red Priest pathway. It's understandable that they crave war, but the Church of the God of Combat has no reason not to stop it. As a member of the Orthodox Deity Alliance, they lack the motivation to help Amon's brother advance to Sequence 0.
Thinking of this, Klein suddenly came up with a theory.
Did that brother of Amon realize that the goddess has already acquired the uniqueness of the death pathway and is in a critical stage, so he revealed this information to the Church of the God of Combat? And the God of Combat is in a neighboring pathway with the goddess, so there's no way he can ignore this matter. He will definitely make an intense response. Of course, it might not be done by the brother of Amon. It might also be because of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction's angel, Hater. After being warned by Einhorn Sauron Medici, this conspirer expert, he discovered the abnormalities ahead of time. On the one hand, he pretends not to notice anything and continues to set up a probe. On the other hand, he pulled in the Church of the God of Combat to worsen the situation and make it more chaotic. The Red Angel Evil Spirit is truly a symbol of war. If this is really the case, then it's inevitable for Faceac to wage this war. Furthermore, the matter regarding the uniqueness of the death pathway has no room for compromise. At the critical moment, the God of Combat might descend, causing a battle of gods that hasn't happened since the end of the Fourth Epoch to happen. This time, for the airship fleet from Faceac could stealthily to travel from the coast for nearly 100 kilometers without being detected, it would definitely have a weather warlock providing protection. Otherwise, even if they were to take a detour across places with few people, they'll still be seen ahead of time and definitely be stopped by the Lowen airships. A weather warlock is an angel. Since the Fifth Epoch, the number of wars that have Beyonders at this level are few and far between. After Emperor Rosel's death, most soldiers don't even know of Beyonders, even in the colonial wars. To have a weather warlock be involved in this means this is really a battle that will sweep through the entire world. It involves battles at all levels. Is this what Amon's brother wants? When the time comes, the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, the Earth Mother, the God of Steam and Machinery, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom will have to take their respective stances. Would the conflicts that they have, temporarily suppressed for almost 2,000 years, be escalated? Earth Mother likes the giants, and even amongst her blessed, they are Faceations. And because of the splitting of Lindbergh, Masson, and Segar, these made the Finapotter Kingdom bear a bone-deep grudge with the Lowen Kingdom and Intis. The king's powers and the divine powers are highly likely to be unified, and they might form an alliance with Faceac. From the south to the north, they will attack Lowen and Intis. Of course, countries like Lindbergh and the Church of Knowledge, who are in the crossfire, will definitely try to stop it. As for Desi Bay, Finapotter, and the Lowen Kingdom are directly connected, the south wouldn't be peaceful either.
The more Klein thought about it, the more he felt that the situation in the northern continent would become abnormally chaotic, and no matter what direction it developed into, he couldn't stop it. Even if he were a Sequence 4 demigod, under the tide of the times, there was no way for him to cause any major impact in this battle of gods, or exert any key influence. It would be pretty good if he could protect himself and the people he cared about. Previously, when the Faceac air fleet attacked, the first thing he did was arrange for Butler, Walter, and company to hide in the underground area that was used as a wine cellar. Then he teleported to Backlund University of Technology. At that time, a bomb had already hit the ground. Some had died and others were injured. The only thing he was thankful for was that his sister Melissa wasn't within the vicinity of the explosion. By the time Melissa and Benson met, the airships from Faceac didn't stay for long and quickly retreated from Backlund. Only then did he return to Dwayne Dantes's residence. Phew! Klein let out a slow sigh of relief. He turned his head to look out the window and saw that, after hearing that the kingdom was declaring war on Fasak, a small number of pedestrians on the street wore a look of horror, as though they had recalled the air raid in the morning. Most of them wore blank expressions with a look of panic. They had no idea what they could do, even if they wanted to. They might not have truly understood what this war would bring, but they instinctively felt that peace had been broken. The future was a chaotic mess, fraught with danger. Klein retracted his gaze and looked at his valet, Enuni, who was sitting opposite him. From his eyes, he realized that he was somewhat at a loss. He gave a half-smile and sighed. He raised his hand to rub his temples and wiped away his depressed and helpless feelings. He thought about what he could do and what he needed to take note of.
No matter what, with this experience and lesson, the king's faction has had a war spark out as they wished. Before all of Lowen collapses, it's nearly impossible for Fasak to invade Backlund again. It would be safer for Benson and Melissa to stay here. What's most worrisome is the lack of food and various assassinations. The latter is nothing. The place where Melissa and Benson live in is decided by their own levels. They aren't anywhere close to coming into contact with someone important who is a target for assassination, so they won't be implicated. Fortunately, Portland Moment's research laboratory has just been established, and there are no results from it yet. It won't become a target that must be destroyed. As for the former, I can provide some help through Miss Audrey. The Winter County at the Holy Cathedral is located in the far north reaches of the kingdom, next to Fasak. It's always the front line of every war. Ma'am Ariana might have returned to help the military. Oh, she might also be sent elsewhere to protect the coast. After all, the defenses of Backlund are sufficient. The royal family definitely has grade 0 sealed artifacts, and also angels. The three churches most likely have hidden tricks up their sleeves. In that case, my greatest pillar of support is gone. At most, I can get some help from the church and use some sealed artifacts. In the past, I wasn't too worried about the effects the Red Angel Evil Spirit's return has on me. Now, I have to raise my guard for this matter. Patrick Bryan knows very well that Dwayne Dantes is equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow, who is equivalent to the Blessed of Death. I had intentionally revealed this information, hoping that it would direct the points of suspicion to Mr. Ozick, the Death Consul. And now this also means that the Red Angel Evil Spirit would be able to grasp this information in no time. The Red Angel Evil Spirit currently only has a high level, but his actual standard shouldn't have recovered to the level of an angel. There's no irreconcilable feud between him and me, nor do I have what he wants. Even if he knows that Dantes is equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow, it would be very unlikely for him to deal with me directly. Other than attacking me directly, what harm will it bring after he grasps this situation? Is he using this to set up a conspiracy or sell the intelligence to someone who needs it? What conspiracy? Who would want it?
Many thoughts and names surfaced in his mind, but they were quickly eliminated by him. This included Amon's brother and the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. From the Red Angel Evil Spirit's past actions, for the time being, he wouldn't make contact with Rose Redemption, and Amon's brother is a sworn enemy of Medici and Company. Suddenly, a name appeared in his mind.
Zaratul.
The leader of the Secret Order, the Sequence One-Seer Pathway Angel Zaratul, who had returned to normalcy after becoming mad. According to Rhodes's feedback, this powerful and concealed existence had already left his original location, and his whereabouts were unknown. Previously, Klein had been wondering if he would come to Backlund, due to the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence.
Medici and the Zaratul and Zoroast families were serving under the Solomon Empire. Even if they weren't friendly with each other, they must be very familiar with each other. In the foggy town, Zaratul had met Gehrman Sparrow. If he really wants to pursue something, he would definitely chase after the crazy adventurer.
With a thought in his mind, Klein instinctively began to assume that Zaratul was in Backlund in search of Gehrman Sparrow, and with that, he began to analyze the situation for other abnormalities. At almost the exact same instant that he thought of something, Klein recalled the failure of the joint operation between Sharon and the Sangwan.
The Rose School of Thought is also looking for Gehrman Sparrow, so would Zaratul, who received the corresponding news, work with them? Back then, the operation was on the brink of success. The Rose School of Thought's person in charge in Backlund had left in a hurry. Clearly, he had only noticed the problem at the last moment. With the Sanguine preparing the corresponding sealed artifact, it's rather impossible for such a failure to happen. Even the Sanguine Duke was puzzled and confused. But what if? What if it was, thanks to the perceptive intuition of a Sequence 1 Angel of the Seer pathway? This would explain it perfectly. Back then, Zaratul was sitting opposite the Rose School of Thought's Backlund person in charge. The Rose School of Thought retreated in a panic, and had even deliberately left behind a doll to create moonlight and cleanse everything so as to cover up the existence of Zaratul. Also, the fact that Gehrman Sparrow has a certain relationship with the Death Consul isn't a secret. Will Zaratul spread out all his marionettes and sense if there's the power of death in Backlund? Previously, when Patrick Bryan was holding rituals, there was actually Zaratul's marionette watching him. If the Red Angel Evil Spirit has already sold the intelligence to Zaratul, then wouldn't my returning to Backlund Street in such a chaotic situation be giving myself up?
His pupils constricted, and he immediately said to the coachman in front,
"Just stop here. I suddenly thought of something else I need to settle."
After he said that, he felt extremely tense, afraid that the coachman wouldn't answer him and continue driving. Fortunately, none of this happened. The horse carriage stopped by the side of the road, and with his valet, Enuni, Klein walked towards a small alley nearby. Immediately following that, he snapped his fingers and allowed the scarlet flames to emerge from his pocket, covering both himself and his marionette.
He had to rush to St. Samuel Cathedral as soon as possible in a concealed manner.
With a flash of flames, their two figures disappeared. However, after completing a leap, the flames within his senses suddenly disappeared, all of them. A spacious living room appeared in front of him. On an ordinary reclining chair was a tall and thin man. He was young and had southern continent blood in him. He looked rather handsome and appeared a little anemic, the Red Angel Evil Spirit, Sauron Einhorn Medici. This Red Angel played with a ball of scarlet-red flames in his hand as the corners of his mouth curled up.
You actually sensed it earlier than I expected, using flaming jump in front of me.